Hello and welcome to the video. My name is Devlin Peck and this is a mini masterclass on how to use states in Articulate Storyline 360. So states are one of the building blocks for interactivity in this tool. So that's why we're going to go pretty in depth. So whether you're new to the tool or you've been at it for a while, you should learn something here and you should be feeling more confident with states by the end of it. So I prepared a practice file for you. We're going to work through it together and I'll also share a link to download it. And we're going to start simple and get slowly and steadily more complex. So very simply, states let you change the appearance of text, images, and shapes on your slide. So pretty much any object that you would have on your slide, whether it's a shape, a text box, literally anything, you can change its appearance. And that may sound, you may be like, okay, what's special about that? We'll get into it. But the way you would do this is by clicking on one of these objects. So in this case, we're clicking on a text box. And again, if you don't have Storyline 360 yet and you want to follow along, I'll share a link to a video on how to go ahead and get it downloaded and installed on your machine. But once you've selected one of the objects on your screen, you can go ahead and select this states window down here at the bottom. So just click on where it says states on this bottom window, and then you will see whatever states are available. So what you can do if you want to add a new state is you can select edit states and then you can select this little new state icon right here. So I'm just going to make one quickly and just call it like test state, for example, and I'm going to click on add. And now we can see we have two states here, the normal state, which always has that little flag on it, and then this new test state that we created. So just to quickly demonstrate some stuff to you, we can literally add entirely new shapes to this state. We could like change the text and make it bold. We could change the text size and make it like 35. We could change the color. So I'm just making a bunch of different changes. You don't have to follow along with this, but whenever this state is like highlighted in blue and it shows that this is the active state we're editing, all of these changes we're making only apply to this state of the object. So if I click back to this normal state, you can see it still looks exactly how we left it. And then if I go to this test state, it looks completely different and we have like an entire new object within this state. So you may be wondering why in the world would I want to do this? That's okay. We are going to get into it. So I'm just going to click done to get out of where I edit these states. And now you can quickly just mouse over them even though you're not in the editor and see what all of your states are. So let's start getting a bit more practical. Generally, though, you would add more states so that when there's some sort of interactivity, like when the user clicks something or hovers over something, you will change the state to whatever they want to see. But next up, let's take a look at built-in states, because the way I built this one, the way I changed this, we would never see this state unless I created some triggers with like some custom programming here to make Storyline show us that state. But Storyline also provides us with built-in states where they handle the programming for us. And these are the 6 built-in states: hidden, hover, down, visited, selected, and disabled. So we're going to look at each of them and see how they function. So every single object you add to your slide, no matter what it is, will have a hidden state. Okay. Now the tricky thing about the hidden state, and this will be important to remember, is that it's hidden from this state's view as well. So notice we only see the normal state, but what we can do is we can change the initial state of this object. So by default, every object you add to the slide, the initial state will be normal, but we can change this initial state to hidden. And we can do that for anything. It's always built in. You can see now it looks a little bit different, but that's not how it would look to our user when they're actually experiencing this project. So notice if I preview this, now by default, when the timeline starts on this slide, the initial state for that object, we set it to hidden. So it will be hidden. A common pattern for this is you may have hidden objects on your slide, and when the user clicks something or does something else on that slide, you can make those objects appear using triggers, which we'll get into later. So again, if I change this back and make the initial state normal, notice now when you preview it, you can actually see what it is you want to see. And similarly, you may have something in the normal state by default, but then when the user does something, you can change the state of whatever object that is to hidden so that it essentially disappears from the user's view. So that's the hidden state. Keep in mind that every object always has a hidden state, and you can always use that in your programming. All right, next up, we will look at the hover state. The hover state, as you can see, it's not one where we just change the initial state for it. We need to actually add this state to our object. So what we can do is we can select edit states. We can add this the same way I added that test state earlier. We can click on new state. But notice if I click on this drop-down menu, we have all of these built-in state options. And these are the states that we're exploring on this slide right here. So what you could do is you could click on it, or another approach is you could just type in whatever built-in state you want here. So I could have just typed in hover. And then when you add it, even if you typed it and didn't click on it, it will bring in all of that default programming that we're going to see in just a second here. So I'm going to add this hover state. And now for the hover, I'm going to just change the text. Well, notice too, before I change anything, I make sure that this hover state is selected. It has that blue outline. We know that we're editing this hover state before we do anything. But now we know that this is what we're changing. I'm going to make the text all capitalized, and I'm going to change the color to this orange color just to make it really clear what's happening here. So as you may have guessed, the hover state, when you hover over this object, it's going to change it to the hover state. And the reason I made the text all caps is just to make it more obvious for people who have a hard time differentiating between colors. It's good not to rely on color alone to communicate things in your project. But let's preview this now and see if this works as intended. So if I hover over this, sure enough, it does change to that hover state. And we didn't have to add a single trigger or any programming to do this. Storyline already handles this for us because we use this built-in state. Now for these other ones, I went ahead and went through that same process. I just added the state by going to edit states, new state, and then clicked on the one we want. And then I just changed it to orange with that all capital text. So I want to preview this now and show you how some of these other ones function. So you saw hidden state that's currently invisible to us. Hover we just saw as well. Down is a little tricky because it only changes to that state while you're actively clicking on the button. So if I just click on this normally, try to catch it. You see, that was a normal click. It was very, very quick. The way I can drag it out for longer so you can see what's really going on here is I will click and hold on this button. As soon as I let go, it disappears. So I don't really use this state very much. I don't think you really need to. I don't think it adds very much. One of the benefits is it could show that like your action was registered by the button, but in most cases, that's going to be pretty obvious because it's going to have made something else happen. Visited and selected. These are two ones to know the difference between as well. So the built-in visited state, as soon as you click on that button, it's going to change to the visited state, and it's not going to change back unless you use some kind of trigger or programming to change it back. So once it's visited, it is a done deal. Now selected operates a little bit differently. When you click on it, it will change to the selected state, but it functions as a toggle. So if you click on it again, it will change right back to the normal state. So you can click on it, it's selected, click on it again, it is deselected. So just keep in mind the selected one is a toggle. Now the disabled state I didn't do anything for yet because this one is a little bit tricky as well. So let's do this one together. I'm going to go to edit states. I'm going to create a new state, and we are going to grab that disabled state. So a common color scheme for disabled states is using like gray text. So I'm going to make the text all capital. And I want to add a hover state here as well, just to show you how the disabled state functions. So I'm going to quickly add the hover state. We're going to make it orange, and we're going to call this one hover. All right, so check this out. We're going to preview this. It's in the normal state. Oh, let me cancel this. I'm going to change the normal state to say normal. So let's see. So it's in the normal state. Notice when I hover over it, it changes to that hover state. If I made it so that when I click on this, it does something, it would still function that way. If you change something to the disabled state, which I'm going to do by changing the initial state to disabled, and notice that too, I'll probably highlight it again later, but as you add new states, you can always change the initial state to any state that you've created. And that just means that's the state it will be in when you first land on that slide. It will be in that state until it's changed for whatever reason. So I changed the initial state to disabled, and now let's preview this, and we're gonna find that the hover state doesn't work anymore. And if I had some triggers and functionality to make it so that when I click this button, it does something, those wouldn't work anymore either. And the way this is commonly used is you may have like a next button or something in that disabled state until the user takes all of the actions they need to take on a slide, and then you can change the state of this back to normal, and then it will be functional, it will have its hover state, it will let you click to advance and all of that good stuff. So these are the built-in states. Again, feel free to download this practice file and play around with these to see how they all work. You can play around with changing the initial states, but you definitely want to be comfortable with these if you're going to be using built-in states. And we'll get into that later. This is something too that I haven't used very often, but if you are using Storyline's built-in characters, this could be really helpful. And what I mean by that is if you go to the Insert tab and then select Characters, Storyline has all of these illustrated characters, and they have photographic characters. What I'm about to show you only works with the illustrated ones. So I just added Lily here to the slide, and let's go to Lily's states panel. We're going to select Edit States. We can select New State, and it looks a little bit different here. You can see we have all of these built-in states, but we also have all of these expression states. So if I click on one of these, Angry, for example, we can click on that. And now we can see it changes her pose, it changes her expression. So Articulate has kind of like built out these emotive states for us so that we don't need to change all of these things from scratch. And we could, of course, always change it further if we wanted to, but you can see if you wanted to change how a character is emoting based on like a quiz response or a question response, you could use these states as well instead of having to build them out custom from scratch. One more thing I want to draw attention to, notice when you use the built-in states, they have a little lightning bolt icon. So minor detail, but something to be aware of. If it has that lightning bolt icon, just know it has some like under the hood programming associated with it that is put there by Storyline, and we don't have access to it in the triggers panel. All right, we will move right along. So this is important to know how this works. You'll probably save yourself a lot of confusion and maybe a lot of time. But changing an object's attribute in its normal state will affect all of the states unless you've changed that attribute for one of the states. And that probably sounds really confusing, so I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So here we have just this rectangle with some text in it, and I'm going to add some new states. So I'm going to go to Edit States, click on New State, and I don't want to use any of the built-in ones. I'm going to use some custom states here. So I'm going to create one called Text, and we're going to change the text in that one. I'm going to create one called Size, and I'm going to create one called Color. All right, so check this out. We have all these different states, but if I go here to the normal state, I'm going to try to change the color of it to this purple color. And then notice as soon as I do that, it changes the color of all of the states to purple. So that's very different than if I were changing one of these states, it would only change that state. And let's do that. So we're on the color state. Let's change the color to orange here. Okay, so it did what we expected. It only changed this one to orange. But now if I go back to the normal state and try to change it to blue, notice it still changes the text state and the size state to blue, but it no longer overwrites the color state. So because we edited this more specific state, that will just be set now. And likewise, you don't even have to go into like where you edit the states. You could just you could change the color from here if I want to change it to green, and you can even change the text here to like button, for example. All right, so now if I go to edit the states again, notice that the text on every single one of these was changed to button, even for the color state. So just because we changed the color here, that just makes sure the color doesn't get overwritten by the normal state, but the text can still get overwritten. So let's go to the text. You know, I think you're getting the point here, but watch, if we change the text here and make it say like I'm text, and then we go back to this normal state, we can make it say change me. As expected, if we go to the size one, it still says change me. If we go to color, it says change me. But if we go to text, it still says I'm text. So you could kind of see how that's at play. And then similarly for the size, if I want to make this one like much longer, and then I go back to the normal state and try to like change the size of this one, maybe I want to make it a lot wider. Notice it didn't change size to look exactly like these ones. So you get the idea here. Just keep that in mind. It could save you a lot of time if you want to change something for every state, like the text. You don't have to go into every state and change it. You can just change it for the normal state, but also know when it would be overwritten. Keep in mind too that you can rename and reorder states, and you already saw we can change the default state. So say later on, I'm like, okay, another developer is going to work on this project. I want to make these states have clearer names. I'm going to edit the states. I can click on the state I want to change the name of, and then I can click on this little pencil icon to rename the state. And I can make it say changed text. And then similarly, I could do that for the others. I could also say, okay, maybe I want to put these in a more intuitive order. You can just click and drag them into whatever order that you'd like. So keep that in mind. And then like we mentioned earlier too, you could always change that initial state to whatever you want. So if I want to change the initial state to this really long version, notice now if I preview the slide, it will stay in that version of the object. But obviously we don't want to do that. All right, so moving right along. Next up, we have buttons. Okay, so a lot of people start using these when they're new to Storyline, and first I'll show you how they work, but then I'll show you how they break and why you probably shouldn't use them unless you're really careful about it. Okay, so we'll first add a button. We can go to the Insert tab, we can click on Button, and then we can click on whatever button design we like. So maybe we'll just do this rectangular button. So then you can click and drag the button however you want it to be. And the interesting thing about buttons are that if we go to their states panel, they already have all of these built-in states associated with them. So we don't even really need to do anything. Like if I preview this right now, we're going to need to add some text, but if I preview this and I hover over it, notice that the color already changes. There's some default programming associated with this. And I could edit the states. I could say click me. I could go to the hover state and I can make it say hover, just so we know it's in that state. We can make this say down. Visited, we can make say visited. And then disabled, we're not even going to change it to disabled, so we don't need to do that. But if we preview this, you'll see it's all already working as intended. I can click it. Notice it said down very briefly, and then it changed to the visited state, and it changes back to hover when we hover over it. So these can save you a lot of programming time. You wouldn't need to create triggers to do these different things. And there's also a really, really cool feature called button sets. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to go over to this button sets page. I don't really need these hover states. I'm just going to get rid of the hover state. And notice too, you can delete states just like you can create them. I can just edit states, click on the one I don't want, and then click delete. Just because you use one, I mean, you've already seen that. You don't have to use all of the built-in states. You could just use one or a few. So I'm going to get rid of all of these built-in states that came with this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this just by pressing Control D on my keyboard. And if you want a list of all the keyboard shortcuts, I'll link that in the description. We have a PDF, makes it really easy to know how to use these. So we have two buttons now, okay? So what you can do if you have multiple buttons is you can create a button set. And you'll see why we want to do this in a second here. So I'm going to right click this. I'm going to hover over button set, and then you can select button set 1. And it's going to make these buttons work together in a really cool way. And I'll show you how. So I'm just going to click button set 1, and now let's click on one of these, and notice we have another state that got automatically added for us. We've seen this state earlier. It's just the selected state. It works like a toggle. But let me show you how this functions when it's in a button set. I'm just going to change this to selected so we know which one is selected. Okay, so check this out. I'm going to preview this. So we'll click on one of these. We know it's selected. If I click on the other one though, it changes that one back to normal. So that's the cool thing about button sets. If you want to have a group of buttons and only one of them can be active or selected at a time, you can turn this into a button set. And this works with 2 buttons. This could work with 50 buttons. So if we get rid of the button set, then that functionality is not going to work like that at all. So that's cool. Keep, you know, some people really like button sets, but I'm going to show you why I never rely on built-in states. Like, let me show you this list of states. These states right here, hover down, selected, disabled. Well, I've used disabled, but I don't use the hover down, visited, or selected state, and I will show you why. So built-in states are unreliable except for the hidden, but I'll put and disabled states because that one's pretty reliable too. But these other ones, not so much. So I just have 2 buttons here, okay? So notice we have this one, we have all of these states we talked about. Same with this one. I'm going to preview this. It's going to work as intended. We could hover over it. You know, they work independently. If I click on this, it changes to the visited state. If I click on this one, it then changes to the visited state. Watch how this functions though if these are grouped. So I'm going to select them both and use Control G. That's another shortcut. I'll do a whole video on how groups work if you're new to Storyline. But a lot of the times you want to do this in case you want these to like animate in fluently together. Yeah, that's the main reason you would want to group buttons like this. But now watch if I hover over one of them. They both hover. If I click on one of them, they both change to the visited state. So this is like a very clear bug with Storyline. It's been like this for years. Me building projects out like this and then having them get broken with these built-in buttons. I've had to rebuild a lot of stuff and spend a lot of hours fixing the mess caused by built-in states, and people I've worked with have had this problem as well. So I just caution against it. I think you'll become a better programmer avoiding the built-in states because you'll have full control over how all of your programming works. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. But I've just seen a lot of problems come up with these states. People have said that some of them are resolved by like reinstalling Storyline at worst, or just like quitting and reopening at best. But again, when I've run into problems with this, I've had to do rework and recreate the project using custom programming. So pretty early on, I'm like, I've gotten burned by this multiple times now. I'm not using these built-in states. So use them at your own risk. This is one of the known glitches I've found. Others seem more sporadic. Let us know in the comments too if you've been using Storyline for a while, if you ever have issues with this. All right, so custom states. So I'm going to just copy this over and paste it onto this slide. So we still have the group. I'm going to do Control-Shift-G to ungroup these. And I'm going to show you how we would do it with custom states. So I think now you can just literally rename the state. Like if I have hover here and I rename it to hover state, yeah, renaming a built-in state disables its default function. Do you want to rename this state? Yes. So notice now it loses that little lightning bolt. This is now just treated as a custom state. It doesn't have any of Storyline's programming associated with it. So if I preview this and I hover over this one, nothing happens. If I hover over this one, it's the hover state. Okay, good. So, and we don't need to do the same with visited. So I'm just going to delete these other, I'm going to delete these other ones. And then I could have done the same thing with this one. I'm just going to delete all of the states and I'll show you how you would normally add a custom state, which you've already seen in this. But here's what I do. When I want to add a hover state to something, I click on new state and I spell out hover state. The reason I can't just spell out hover is because it will add that built-in hover state, which I do not want. I want to be in control of the programming. So I'm going to delete that and I would name it hover state, just like this. All right. And then I guess we want to change it into like some sort of color. Something too that I haven't mentioned, but notice like how everything else on the slide is dimmed. If I wanted to like grab a color using the eyedropper of like this, for example, well, it's pulling it from my little highlighter. but notice it would just be grabbing gray. If we don't want that to happen, you can uncheck this box right here, dim background objects. I'm going to leave it checked, but just know that you have this option available. And there's another option here too. Say I've done like some wild stuff to this, like if I add all sorts of letters here, do something really wild, you can click on this reset state button and it will bring the state back in line with the normal state. All right, so with that said, this one's going to be a little different because I don't know what color that top button uses, but that's okay. And what we would do is we would create a trigger. And I have a full video coming about these, but let me just give you a quick preview of how I use custom states and triggers to work together. So we would change the state of button 1 to hover state when the user, when the mouse hovers over button 1. So this will make sense later on when you see the next video if you're brand new to Storyline. And we leave this option on to restore previous state when the user hovers out. Because we don't want someone to hover over this and then it stay in that hover state. We want to make sure that when they hover back away, it changes back to that normal state. So I'm going to press OK there. I'm going to copy this trigger, click on this other button, and then paste the trigger. I'll open it up to see if it's working as intended. It's not. We want to change the state of button 2 to hover state when the user hovers over button 2 and restore. So again, don't worry about those triggers yet. If you're new to this, I'm going to quickly preview this to show you how it works. So that changes to hover, and so does that. Now, if we group them, and this is what I want to show you, this is why they're more reliable. If we group them and then preview, we can hover over one, hover over the other. They work independently. So that's just one glitch that you help avoid when you use custom states, and it's why for years I've stuck to the custom states, because these bugs have not been getting fixed, and you never know when they're going to pop up. All right, so this one is a really, really cool feature that I had to show you in this video. You can actually import pictures as states. Instead of creating all these states individually, you can just insert one of your pictures, like whatever you want the default state to be, essentially the normal state. Then you can click on Edit States, and you can click on Insert Pictures as States. So it's a really cool feature right here. It's right next to the New State button. I'm going to click on that. And notice I have these other phases of the moon. So I could actually just select every single new state that I want based on these pictures, and it's going to name these states based after the first part of whatever the file is named. So once I press open here, we're going to have new states called Moon 2, Moon 3, Moon 4, Moon 5. So check it out. So there we go. So really cool. So it automatically added those states for us. I can go through them to see the stages of the moon, and then this opens the door for some really cool interactions. You know, we could have like a slider interaction going here. We could change the state of this based on like the timeline. Or we can just have buttons to cycle through the states. But I just wanted to show you, yeah, instead of like creating a new state, calling it Moon 2, inserting a picture, and then going through the list and doing that for the others, you can just use that really handy feature right there, insert pictures as states. Another cool part about it is if one of these images were called hover, it would actually be that default built-in hover state. So if you name one of your images after the built-in state, it will take on that functionality for you as well. So really cool. And I think if I wanted this to, like, for example, if I wanted it to show Moon 5 on hover, again, I'm telling you not to use these built-in states, but just so you know it's possible, I could just change that to hover. Now it has that lightning bolt. So now we'll see if we hover over it, it should change all the way to that state. So pretty cool stuff. Just wanted to give you a good idea of how all of this could work together if you're comfortable using the custom states or the built-in states, which I am not, but some teams do. All right, so if you enjoyed that, next steps, feel free to download and explore this practice file, play around with the states until you're really, really comfortable with how they work, because in the next video, we are going to dive into triggers, and that's where the real fun starts. Again, a lot of the functionality and programming we'll do depends on states. At This is a building block, but triggers are where the real fun begins. That's how we make things happen based on the user's interactivity. So thanks for making it to the end. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.